The lakefront property wasn't much to look at from a road. The mailbox leaned sideways like it had given up fighting gravity years ago, and the gravel driveway was more weeds and rock. But as you turned the final bend and that serene, glass-still water opened up in front of you, it took your breath away. I didn't care that the cabin needed work or that the dock was barely holding together. I'd served 25 years in law enforcement to buy peace like this. And peace was exactly what I thought I was buying. The cabin sat on the edge of Old Birch Lake, a long-forgotten patch of blue that had become something of a hidden gem after the new freeway made it inconvenient for most people. Perfect for a guy like me, divorced, early retirement, and all the time in the world to fish, kayak, and maybe teach my old Labrador to fetch the mail. I paid in cash. No mortgage, no stress. The only thing standing between me and my new life was a set of rusty keys and the local wildlife figuring out someone was moving in. There was no homeowners association. That was critical. I'd turned down a half-dozen lake properties simply because they came with HOAs. I didn't want someone telling me what shade of beige to paint my porch swing. I wanted freedom, unfiltered and absolute. I moved in mid-May, and those first 2 weeks were like heaven. I rebuilt the dock myself, stained the deck, got a fire pit going out back, and finally organized the tools in the shed. I fished every morning, grilled trout at night, and spent afternoons on the porch with a cold beer and nothing but the sound of loons. My dog, Bear, hadn't looked that happy in years. Then Karen showed up. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I had just come back from the local hardware store with a few cans of paint and a new reel. As I pulled into the drive, I saw a pearl-white SUV parked at the edge of my property. Close enough to be on the shoulder, but angled just so it peeked in. A woman stood outside it, arms crossed, sunglasses low on her nose, and a clipboard in hand. I knew the type before she even opened her mouth. "You new here?" she called out, walking toward me like she owned the ground she stepped on. "I am," I said, friendly but firm. "Just got settled last week." She looked past me toward the cabin, squinting. "This is 8825 Old Birch Lane, right?" "That's right." She clicked her pen, writing something down. "Okay, so here's the thing. This lot falls under the Old Birch Waterside Homeowners Association. I'm the acting president." I raised an eyebrow. "Funny, my deed says otherwise." She froze for a second, just a blink, but I noticed it. "Maybe your title company missed something. It happens. We had a few plots rezoned last year. Anyway, all lakefront properties fall under our regulations now. I'll just need your email to send over the welcome packet and the covenant agreement." I stood there for a second, processing what she just said. I knew property law. I'd done background checks, run VIN numbers, unknotted probate messes. My title was clean. "No, HOA. I'm going to stop you right there," I said calmly. "There is no HOA on this property. I made absolutely sure of that before buying. If there had been one, I wouldn't be here." She adjusted her sunglasses. "Well, there is now. And since you're technically part of the community—" "Technically?" I interrupted. She looked irritated. "You'll find that cooperation is really the best policy. We've had problems with independent types before. Trust me, it's easier to just go with the flow. We'll need you to take down the dock. It doesn't match approved designs, and we discourage exterior paint that isn't in the natural tones palette. You'll also need to install a motion-activated light by your front door for security compliance." I laughed, not to be rude, just out of sheer disbelief. "Ma'am, I don't know what kind of power trip you're on, but this property isn't under your control. You don't get to dictate how I live." Her smile dropped. "You're going to regret saying that." She stormed off and drove away without another word. At first, I figured that was the end of it. Just another entitled neighbor trying to scare the new guy. But something in her eyes bothered me. Like she wasn't just bluffing, like she had a playbook and had already turned a page. By Thursday, there were notices pinned to my fence. "Violation, unapproved dock structure. Cease use immediately. Warning, non-compliant exterior fixtures detected. Failure to respond may result in penalties." Each one was printed on fancy letterhead. Old Birch Waterside HOA, with a fake seal and a Gmail address. I called my real estate attorney. She pulled my deed and tax maps. The result? Just as I thought. No HOA, no governing body, no shared covenant. The only oversight on my property was the county zoning office, and they hadn't filed a complaint in over 10 years. So I ignored the notices, ripped them off the fence, and tossed them into the fire pit. That weekend, Karen came back. Not alone this time. She brought a guy in a blue polo shirt and khakis, introduced as our community compliance officer. He didn't say much, just stood there, arms crossed, like muscle. Karen handed me a manila envelope. Inside were a dozen papers, each outlining different violations. Fines ranging from $50 to $300. Deadlines. Steps for appeal. None of this is enforceable. I told her. It's harassment. She smirked. Tell it to the county judge when we take you to small claims. You do that. I shut the door in her face. But then things got weirder. Over the next 2 weeks, my mailbox was knocked off twice. Bear got sick after eating something on the front porch. Turned out to be a packet of meat filled with crushed pills. A random building inspector showed up saying he got an anonymous tip that I was running an unlicensed Airbnb. And one afternoon, I came back from fishing to find tire tracks up to my back deck. Karen wasn't just trying to scare me. She was escalating. I installed cameras, pulled footage, got license plates. Everything pointed to people tied to her little self-appointed HOA. People who weren't neighbors. People who clearly didn't care about trespassing laws. I filed a police report. The local deputy took it seriously, but warned me it might be tough to prove anything beyond petty harassment. Unless they caught someone in the act or I had hard footage of someone tampering with my dog's food, the law's hands were tied. That's when Karen pushed it too far. One Monday morning, I heard engines. 2 black and white cruisers pulled into my driveway, sirens off, lights off, but uniformed officers stepped out. They said they'd received a report of someone squatting on private property. Karen stood behind them, arms crossed, watching. I introduced myself calmly, showed them my ID, deed, utility bills, everything. Sir, we're just following up on a call, one of the officers said. You clearly live here and have full rights to the property. Apologies for the inconvenience. Karen shouted from behind them. He's lying. He doesn't even live here full time. This property is vacant half the year. He's using it as a weekend rental. He's not even in compliance. The officer turned to her. Ma'am, do you have documentation? She turned red. I'm the HOA president. I am the documentation. I could see the officer bite back a smirk. Then I said the words that changed everything. I think now is a good time to mention I'm a retired sheriff's lieutenant. I reached into my wallet, not for a badge, I wasn't on duty anymore, but for the ID that still identified me as law enforcement. It was a courtesy most officers extended and respected. The cops immediately changed tone. Karen froze. Her mouth hung open for half a second before she spun around and made a beeline for her SUV. Have a good day, ma'am, one officer said. They apologized again and drove off. Karen peeled away, tires spinning on the gravel. I stood there, breathing in the lake air, heart pounding just a little. I had just exposed the queen of fake authority for what she was. But that was just the beginning. Because now, I wasn't just defending my property. I was going to burn her whole operation to the ground, legally, publicly, and permanently. It started with a knock on the door at 6:42 a.m. on a Monday, loud, insistent, and wrong. Nobody comes to the lake cabin at that hour, unless they got bad news or bad intentions. I swung the door open to find 2 uniformed officers standing at the threshold, one with his hand already hovering over his holster. Sir, the lead deputy said with a straight face, we received a report of trespassing on private HOA land. Are you the property owner here? I blinked, still half of my coffee. Trespassing? On my own land. The younger officer's eyes flicked to the lake behind me, then back at the GPS screen on his phone. Lakefront Serenity HOA. Caller says you're refusing to leave private property. That's when I knew exactly who had dialed 911. Karen, the queen bee of Lakefront Serenity. And clearly, she was just getting started. I walked back into the cabin. grabbed the thick deed folder I kept in my desk drawer, complete with lot surveys, satellite overlays, property lines, and a legal battle I had fought to get this land subdivided and off the HOA grid 2 years prior. Everything had been verified by the county. I wasn't on HOA land. In fact, I was surrounded by it, but deliberately excluded from it. That drove Karen nuts. The cops reviewed it and quickly apologized. "Looks like you're good," one said with an exhale. She didn't mention any of this. "Of course she didn't," I said. "She just wants me gone." That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Karen didn't back off. She doubled down. The next day, a tow truck showed up at the end of my drive, just idling. I walked out and waved them off. "Wrong house," I said. "No, ma'am down the road called us." The driver said, squinting at a clipboard, "Said you parked illegally on a common access lane. Except that's my private gravel drive. See that gate over there? And that big red sign that says private property and no trespassing? Yeah, that's your clue." The driver checked again, then drove off, but not before muttering something about crazy lake people. I was beginning to understand exactly what kind of chaos Karen could stir up with just a phone and a clipboard. By Thursday, I found an anonymous notice duct taped to my mailbox. No official seal, no address, just bold, all caps letters that read, "You are in violation of lake community guidelines. Remove unapproved structures or face fines." Unapproved structures? That would be my boathouse, which I'd restore from scratch, which I had obtained every permit for, which had stood on the lakeshore since 1984. I tore the note down and tossed it in my trash, but I kept a photo. By the end of that week, my mailbox was stuffed with phony HOA violation slips, most of them obviously copied and pasted from standard templates. Excess noise, improper trash storage, non-compliant landscaping, and my personal favorite, unsightly decor. That one referred to a rustic American flag sign I'd hung next to my porch swing. Karen was playing a slow burn war of attrition. She wanted to annoy me into compliance, wear me down until I either sold the cabin or caved and joined her HOA. And judging from the fact she lived directly across the lake from me in a house with a telescope on the third-floor balcony, I had no doubt she watched every move I made. But it wasn't just paperwork and fake violations. One afternoon, as I pulled into my gravel drive, I noticed something off. A small sign had been staked just inside my property line. It read, "Private HOA property, access by permit only." I stopped the truck, got out, and yanked it from the ground. It wasn't even on her side of the line. This was a full 2 feet inside my deeded boundary. She was now trespassing. The next morning, I checked my outdoor cameras. Sure enough, at 2:17 a.m., a shadowy figure had walked up a mallet and signpost. I couldn't prove it was her from the angle, but the person had the same gait, same height, same puffed-up parka Karen always wore. I saved the footage. Still, I kept my cool. No confrontation. No escalation from my side. But then came the drone. It buzzed overhead the following Saturday while I was grilling trout. A black quadcopter, hovering maybe 15 feet above the patio, just floating there like an electronic mosquito. I waved it off. It didn't leave. So I waved again, but this time with a middle finger. That seemed to trigger something because the drone dipped, rose, then flew back toward the cluster of lakefront homes across the water, right toward Karen's address. That night, I finally had a real conversation with the sheriff's department. Not as a civilian, but as who I actually was. I showed up in plain clothes and quietly asked for Captain Lyle. I had known him since training days. We sat in the back. I laid out the footage, the fake violations, the drone harassment, and the unrelenting campaign Karen had launched. Lyle didn't even flinch. We've had 2 complaints from that HOA in the last 6 months, both from the same number. Same woman. One of them claimed someone was running a meth lab in their garage. And was it meth? I asked. "Nope," he said. It was a dehumidifier. Karen had a history, and I had the receipts. But I still hadn't pushed back. I hadn't filed a report. I hadn't gone to court. I hadn't even told her who I really was. Not yet, because revenge is best served with silence first, and then delivered in full uniform. She was getting bolder, though. Just 2 days later, she crossed the final line. I came home from running errands in town to find a full HOA board standing on the edge of my property, with measuring wheels and a clipboard. Karen stood in front, holding a rolled-up flag, some kind of HOA banner she clearly intended to install. "What is this?" I asked, stepping out of my truck. "Surveying," she said. "We've determined this land was improperly sold, and the HOA is moving to reclaim it." That's when I smiled, because that was the moment I knew she had made the biggest mistake of her life. From the moment Karen realized she couldn't muscle me into her HOA by force, things began to unravel, but not in the way she expected. Her phone calls and veiled threats stopped. The daily mailbox flyers disappeared. And for a week, it was eerily quiet around the lake. Too quiet. It was the kind of silence you get when a predator is crouching, waiting for the right moment to strike. I wasn't naive. I've been in law enforcement long enough to recognize the calm before the storm. So I decided to get ahead of whatever was coming. I started with the county clerk's office. I requested a full plat survey of the lake area, including the borders of both HOA managed and private properties. It took some time, but I received the official county records. Crystal clear boundary lines, and my cabin fell entirely outside the HOA jurisdiction by 43 feet, no less. I made laminated copies and stored one in my cabin, one in my truck, and one at the precinct. I also contacted the county recorder and verified that I had never signed, agreed to, or been incorporated into any kind of HOA governance when I bought the property. It was rural private land with no encumbrances. Karen had no legal leg to stand on, and she likely knew that from the beginning, but I wanted everything airtight. Next, I met with a real estate attorney, an old friend I'd worked cases with when property disputes turned nasty. I gave him the situation, and he smiled halfway through. "This one's going to backfire on her," he said. "Keep logging everything. She's fishing, but you've got the law on your side. Just don't give her bait. What if she escalates again?" He slid a file across the table. Inside was a basic cease and desist letter template. "If she crosses the line again, we'll serve this. If she keeps going, we file harassment and seek damages. But you might not even need it. Most of these types fold when they know you've got documentation." That should have been the end of it. But this was Karen, and folding wasn't her strong suit. 3 days later, while I was clearing brush by the waterline, I saw it. A drone, one of those white commercial types with a camera. It hovered above my dock, dipped low toward my window, and then zipped off back over the HOA side. She was spying now, taking pictures, probably hoping to catch a violation or invent one. So I walked inside, opened my badge wallet, and filmed a quick video. To whom it may concern, this property is privately owned, not subject to any HOA regulations, and protected under state privacy and trespassing laws. Any unauthorized drone surveillance will be treated as a violation of Code Section 943.03 and Section 810.09. You are being recorded. I uploaded it to a password-protected cloud folder, made public only if needed. That night, I saw Karen at the local diner. She was seated 2 booths over, whispering furiously to a man in a blazer, probably her HOA attorney. She caught sight of me walking in. Her face went pale, and I smiled politely like I didn't know she was already digging her own legal grave. The very next morning, the lake sheriff showed up again, this time with 2 officers. Karen was behind them, arms crossed, lips pursed like she just swallowed battery acid. "Morning, Sheriff," I said, stepping off my porch. "Something wrong?" He handed me a printed document, a noise ordinance complaint signed by 5 HOA members. According to the paper, I had violated local decibel levels during daytime hours. I blinked. "This is about the birds?" Karen cut in. "It's your chainsaw. You were running it for hours. The noise carries across the water and ruins the peaceful environment for everyone here." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Karen, you realize the law allows daytime work with power tools up to 85 decibels, right? My saw barely pushes 70, and I'm a quarter mile off your shoreline. That doesn't mean it's not disruptive. We have retirees who can't rest." The sheriff raised a hand. "Enough," He looked at me. You got proof you're within the limits? Absolutely. I brought out my phone and showed him a short video I had filmed just the day before with a decibel meter app while the chainsaw was running, measured from the dock. 71 decibels. I also have the model specs. He nodded. You're clear. Karen lost it. This is an HOA matter. He's not part of our community, and he shouldn't be allowed to disrupt us. That's just it, I said calmly, reaching for my badge wallet. I open it slowly, holding it up. Karen, I'm not just not part of your HOA. I'm the newly appointed deputy chief for this county, and I'm advising you now on record to cease your harassment before we escalate this into formal charges. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. She looked at the sheriff, then back at me. You're bluffing. The sheriff chuckled. He's not. We just had a promotion ceremony last month. He's my number 2. Karen turned beet red. The 2 officers behind her shifted, suddenly uncomfortable. I turned back to the sheriff. I'll consider this complaint addressed, but if she files another false report, I'll initiate legal action. He nodded. Understood. Karen turned and stormed off, heels crunching in the gravel. But she wasn't done yet, not even close, because now she wasn't just obsessed with my cabin. She was humiliated, and that made her dangerous. There's a look some people get when you catch them in a lie, when you strip away every excuse, every mask, and force them to face the truth they can't manipulate. Karen had that look as she stomped away from my cabin that morning. Her eyes were glassy with fury. Her mouth moved, chewing on silence, like every insult she wanted to hurl was stuck in her throat, because there was no longer a single cop, neighbor, or legal excuse left that would save her face. But I knew better than to let my guard down. When someone like Karen loses control, they either retreat or go nuclear. And Karen? She didn't strike me as a retreating type. I set up 2 motion-triggered trail cameras, one overlooking the gravel drive that led to my cabin, and the other facing the dock, not for paranoia, but because I'd seen enough retaliation cases to know that humiliation has a half-life, and Karen's was just getting started. I wasn't waiting for her to make her next move. I was preparing for it. 2 nights later, around 1:43 a.m., I got the alert. The gravel road camera lit up headlights, a single vehicle. It crept past the county line, paused just outside the wooden barrier I'd installed, then reversed quickly and peeled away. I pulled the footage. Karen's car. License plate visible. Just close enough to be seen. Not close enough to be caught trespassing. The next morning, there was a nail in my tire. Not a construction nail. A carpet tack, bent in half, laid flat against the gravel so it couldn't be seen until it was too late. My truck wasn't in view of the cameras, but I'd parked it there every night for 3 months without issue. Until now. I patched the tire, printed a screenshot from the night footage, and hand-delivered it to the sheriff. She's testing boundaries, I told him, but she'll slip. She already has, he said, flipping the image over. We got an open line to the judge. Next time she crosses a line, we file. But it wasn't a nail or a drone that finally gave us the leverage we needed. It was Karen's pride. One afternoon, I heard something off, an echo I couldn't quite place. I stepped onto the deck, looked across the lake toward the HOA side. At the far dock, Karen was holding court like a queen. She had a little folding table set up, 3 other women seated beside her, and a stack of clipboards. They were hosting a neighborhood meeting on lake compliance. On my dock, half a mile away, I could hear Karen's voice floating on the breeze. We're working with the local authorities to ensure the entire shoreline remains clean, regulated, and visually cohesive. Unregistered structures or private expansions, like that unsightly shed over there, are subject to removal. She was pointing at my boathouse. I laughed, loudly. She'd just made a public claim that she was regulating shoreline structures outside her jurisdiction and named mine as a target. That was a mistake I'd been waiting for. I went inside, pulled up my files, and made a single call to the state attorney general's office. Not the sheriff. Not code enforcement. No more slaps on the wrist. What Karen didn't know was that falsely representing yourself as having legal authority over private land, especially to enforce fines or remove structures, isn't just annoying. It's fraudulent misrepresentation and possibly a criminal act under state law. 2 days later, a formal inquiry was opened. 3 investigators, one from the county prosecutor's office, one from the Department of Consumer Protection, and one from the State Land Commission, visited Karen during her next compliance meeting. I watched the whole thing from across the lake with a coffee in hand. They handed her a subpoena, seized the clipboards, and left her standing there stunned as the HOA board members tried to act like they hadn't just witnessed the downfall of their emperor. That same afternoon, I received an official request from the Land Commission to provide testimony and documentation regarding the harassment. I gladly compiled it. Drone footage, noise complaint logs, the tire nail incident, Karen's HOA flyers, even a statement from the sheriff. But the cherry on top was a recording I had made of her public speech about removing my boathouse. When I sent that in, my attorney laughed for 5 straight minutes on the phone. "This is slam dunk territory now," he said. "She's going to get dragged." Still, Karen wouldn't go down without flailing. The week before her hearing, I noticed something strange again. My dock gate had been unlocked. I always kept it bolted, even when I went into town. The lock wasn't broken, but someone had clearly tampered with it. The trail cam hadn't caught anything obvious, so I did something I should have done weeks earlier. I installed a dummy gate camera and placed a real microcam inside the boathouse light fixture, disguised to look like a bulb. 3 days later, jackpot. I was at the precinct when the alert hit my phone. Motion detected. I opened the stream. Karen was on my dock. Not near it. On it. She stepped up to the shed door, glanced around, pulled out a tape measure, and began recording dimensions on a notepad. I watched her kneel, photograph the foundation, and even try the doorknob. She crossed the legal line so hard she left tire marks. This time, I didn't just file another complaint. I walked into the sheriff's office, handed him the footage, and said, "We're pressing charges for criminal trespass and attempted unlawful entry." An arrest warrant was drafted within 48 hours. The moment Karen was served was something I'll never forget. She was out pruning her hydrangeas like the Queen of Lakeview, sunglasses on, smug as ever, until the marked cruiser pulled up in front of her house. She stood frozen, clippers dangling from one hand. The deputy stepped out. "Ma'am, you're being served a notice to appear in court on criminal trespassing charges and attempted unlawful entry. You'll need to sign here." Karen dropped the clippers, literally dropped them, then tried to argue, then plead, then deny everything, until the officer showed her a still frame from the boathouse cam. "I was inspecting community compliance," she shouted. "This property is not part of your community," the deputy said, "and you had no right to be there." News spread like wildfire. Karen's mugshot made it onto a local news blog. The HOA's legal advisor resigned the next day. 2 board members followed. A civil case was filed against her by a neighbor who claimed she'd been fined for things Karen had no authority over. And as for me, I filed a restraining order. Karen was barred from stepping within 200 feet of my property, under threat of arrest. I installed a new gate, bigger, stronger, locked by keypad, and posted a new sign. Private property, not part of HOA. Trespassers will be prosecuted. But just for flair, I mounted a copy of the county map on the signpost, highlighted in red, the exact property line Karen had so desperately tried to erase. I didn't need revenge. The law handled that for me. I just made sure every time Karen stepped onto her porch and looked across the lake, she'd see a daily reminder of the one neighbor she couldn't bully, the one with the badge, and the cameras, and the receipts. The fallout from Karen's failed noise complaint was like the quiet after a lightning strike, brief, tense, and absolutely misleading. I figured she'd back down after being humiliated in front of her precious HOA and a few uniformed officers. I underestimated her pride and how much she craved control. Turns out, Karen had one last play, and it was reckless. Exactly 4 days after the chainsaw incident, I got a knock on my cabin door right after dawn. It wasn't the sheriff this time. It was a city building inspector and a fire marshal. "Mr. Banner," the man in a clipboard asked, adjusting his glasses. We received an anonymous tip that your structure might be violating fire code regulations. Something about improper outdoor storage and combustible materials. I blinked. You're kidding. No, sir. We have to investigate. And investigate they did for nearly 2 hours. They combed every inch of my cabin's perimeter, opened the outdoor storage sheds, checked my propane tank, examined the smoke detectors and extinguishers. By the end of it, they both looked mildly annoyed. This place is pristine, the fire marshal said. Actually one of the most compliant rural cabins I've seen. Whoever filed this tip was either mistaken or malicious. He handed me a yellow copy of the report. No violations, no action required. Karen had officially weaponized the city now, and that changed things. That afternoon, I made 3 moves. First, I met with my attorney again, and this time we didn't talk about cease and desist orders. We filed a harassment suit. I presented a full dossier: video evidence, drone footage, legal property surveys, false reports, and the unnecessary city inspection. Karen had not only violated my privacy, she'd crossed into targeted harassment, possibly even abuse of authority via HOA manipulation. Second, I reached out to a journalist friend, one who covered small-town corruption and civic overreach for a statewide online outlet. I gave him the story, evidence, and a few names. He loved it, said it would make a perfect piece on HOA overreach and the abuse of power by board suburban committees. And third, I paid a little visit to the county zoning commission. You see, Karen's precious HOA had been trying to expand for years. Their bylaws made it clear they wanted to absorb all non-HOA land surrounding the lake, especially lots like mine. But to do that, they needed to pass certain zoning changes that required community feedback. Guess who now had the legal standing to file formal opposition? Me. I submitted official documentation contesting the HOA's rezoning petition, citing their history of neighbor harassment and bad faith enforcement. With a bit of legal pressure and the upcoming article, the board quietly withdrew the petition 2 weeks later. But the real payoff came from the media exposure. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning with the headline, Lake HOA accused of harassing police officer after failing to absorb private property. It included screenshots of Karen's fake tickets, the drone photo timestamps, and a quote from the fire marshal confirming the bogus fire hazard claim. The story exploded locally. The HOA board held an emergency meeting, and Karen, who by this point had been president for 3 years, was unceremoniously asked to resign. Her neighbors, tired of her drama, voted her out by a 9-1 margin. The best part? Karen was still on the hook for the civil suit. Her new lawyer tried to settle quietly, but I refused. A month later, we went to court. My lawyer laid everything out in chronological order, and the judge didn't need long. Karen was ordered to pay $15,000 in damages plus legal fees. The judge called it an embarrassing misuse of community resources and targeted harassment by someone drunk on power. She couldn't even look at me when the verdict came down. As I walked out of that courtroom, a couple of Karen's former HOA allies passed me in the hallway. One of them nodded and said, "You did the whole lake a favor." I went back to my cabin, made some coffee, sat on the deck, and watched the water. Peace. Real peace. No Karen, no fake tickets, no surveillance drones. Just the birds, the breeze, and the knowledge that sometimes doing things by the book, with the right mix of patience and precision, is the most powerful move of all. Oh, and about that cabin, I installed a brand new 12-foot private property, non-HOA land sign right at the edge of the boundary line. Just big enough for Karen to see from her porch.